Many of you know that I love to travel. In addition to my work with Eliot Church, I'm trying to build a second vocation in the travel industry, taking Christian folks to visit sacred places around the world. I've always believed that travel helps us open our minds and our hearts, helps us see different ways of being and respect other cultures and ways of doing things. It deepens our sense of connection with other people all over the world, helps us really know that we're part of a common humanity. I'm convinced that I was really blessed as a child because my parents helped us travel, both as a child and then as a young adult. And I think those experiences helped make me more compassionate, more adventurous, more creative as an adult than I would have been otherwise. Now I realize I've mostly traveled with a lot of privilege. I've traveled for learning and for leisure, not to escape some kind of dangerous political system or to find a better life for my children. I've mostly been able to travel with the security of a US passport and a credit card and the sense that probably somewhere I can find somebody who speaks my language. I know not everyone gets to travel quite like that. But I want to invite you to join me on a journey for the next 5 weeks, a Roman holiday. We can see, and I think John just got back. Were you in Rome on your trip too? Yeah. We can see the Colosseum, where gladiators battled and Christians were martyred. We could go to the Forum, where the ancients waged hardy political debates and held criminal trials. We could tour the Pantheon, where all of Rome's gods could be worshipped at once. We could get some gelato. What's a trip to Italy without gelato, right? Okay, I would take you all to Rome if I could, but I can't. What I do want to take you on is a Romans holiday. It's almost as good. I want us to go together on a 5-week journey into that much celebrated and much debated letter from Paul to the Christians in Rome. Now, Romans, like Rome, has some favored sites that everybody knows about. You might have heard of them even if you've never spent much time in the book of Romans. You might know all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Anybody heard that before? That's from Romans chapter 3. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. The wages of sin is death. How about all things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to God's purpose? All of that, those are all in Romans. But I would like us to go a little beyond those favorite tourist stops with their trinket shops and their comforting familiarity. They are important to Romans, just like the Colosseum is important to Rome. They don't show us the whole picture. If you want to get to know the real Rome, then you need to visit the neighborhoods where everyday working class Italians live. And if you really want to see the whole picture, you should visit the camps and the once vacant buildings that are filled now with refugees from Syria and Iraq and North Africa. If you want to get to know the real Romans, you have to put those favored verses back in their context. You have to delve deep into the sometimes convoluted and contradictory arguments that Paul makes. And you have to go beyond the egocentric Western Protestant understanding of the letter to really appreciate its cosmic nature. So this week I want to start with sort of a scenic overlook. That's what I do with groups when I take them to Jerusalem. We drive up to the Mount of Olives or Mount Scopus, and our guide can show us the whole city all at once. Lots of guides do this no matter where you go in the world. They help you get a lay of the land, to understand the historical and modern divisions and demarcations. It goes like this. They'll say, now over here is such and such, and if you look a little to the left and just beyond that, you'll see this and that. And then over on this side, that's where all the really old stuff is. And then Just over that hill, that's the new stuff. Pretty much every time. Different this and that and stuff, but you kind of get a lay of the land. First though, let me introduce you to your guide. You see, Paul wrote the letter to the Romans, but he was not the one to deliver it. That task was left to Phoebe. And we don't meet Phoebe here in chapter 1 that we read today. She actually doesn't get introduced to us until the very end of the letter in chapter 16. But her presence and the way Paul talks about her suggests that she's pretty important. We should take note of her. This is what Paul says. I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a deacon of the church at Cenchrea, so that you may welcome her in the Lord as is fitting for the saints, and help her in whatever she may require from you. She has been a benefactor of many and of myself as well. Phoebe was a deacon at the church in Cenchrea. That's a hard one. It's near Corinth. That's where Paul was located when he wrote this letter to the church in Rome. And that title, it's familiar to us, deacon. It conveys a sense of leadership. Paul also calls Phoebe a benefactor. She was a woman of means. And if she was married, she managed her money apart from her husband, so that she was known as a financial supporter, not only of Paul, but of many people. Phoebe did not have a patron. Phoebe was a patron. Phoebe traveled from Cenchrea to Rome to deliver this letter to the Christians there. They didn't have the mail back then. She also may have been the one to read it out loud, the first one to answer questions about what Paul meant when he said this or that. There should be more Christian women named Phoebe, I think. And some of you may know that in some Christian circles, Paul gets used to limit or even prohibit women's participation in church leadership. Already, though, Romans is confounding that understanding of Paul. In the introduction of Phoebe and in the closing lists of readings in chapter 16, we see 10 women who are called co-laborers, even apostles, sharing their wealth, risking their lives for the sake of the gospel. Ladies, I want you to hear me, and especially young women. If someone tells you that women should stay in their place, especially in the church, I want you to ask them, what about Phoebe? What about Priscilla? What about Junia? The other names are harder to pronounce. Paul had no trouble honoring their leadership in the church, entrusting them with important work. And in that same list in Romans 16, there's actually two lists. There's a list of people in Rome that Paul somehow knew, and he sends greetings to them. And then there's a list of people back in Corinth who want to send their greetings to all the people in Rome, right? So in these two lists, we get to meet some of the everyday Romans to whom this letter is addressed. We find names like Hermes and Nereus and Persis. Those are names that usually belonged to slaves. We find other names that reflect a high social standing. Even one named Erastus, who was Corinth's director of public works. That's for Michael. Tell him there's a director of public works in Romans. Most of these names, they look Greek, not Jewish. But much of this letter suggests that the Roman church included not only Greeks, but also Jews, Jewish followers of Christ. And it also included Greek people who kept Jewish practice before and after they became converts to Christ. In other words, there are very complicated social relationships that are being negotiated in this community of Jesus followers. And a thorough tour of Romans will invite us to wander through those diverse neighborhoods, and to think deeply about what it means to be a follower of Jesus today in a diverse nation, in a globalized world. Let's go back up to that scenic Overlook. If Romans has a mountain from which to see the big picture, We might find it in chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. Paul says, "I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes, first for the Jew, then for the Gentile. For in the gospel, a righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith." This is a letter about faith and about salvation. If you know a little about this letter and about church history, you might have already expected that. Martin Luther's meditation on Romans is what sparked the Protestant Reformation and gave shape to the way the Protestant church has understood the meaning of Jesus' death for the last 501 years. But focusing on a Lutheran or a Protestant understanding of salvation is like visiting Rome and only seeing a few of the tourist highlights. It's worth doing, but there's more. And there's more to this letter than what Paul thinks about salvation than just how God manages to save you personally, individually. Next week, we'll dive into that reading of Romans that has dominated modern Western Christian thought. If you're a long-time churchgoer, some of that might be so familiar to you that you don't even notice it anymore. The same way a native Roman might drive by the Colosseum every day on her way to work and never ponder the brutality that unfolded there or stop to be in awe at the sight of those majestic ruins. Any of you ever lived in a place where tourists visited and you forget to even look at the things that all the tourists come to see? If that's you, if you're a long-time churchgoer steeped in this language of Romans, I hope to help you pause and to look closely at the world that already surrounds you, to appreciate it, but also to question it, and to look at it with maybe a more critical eye. And if you're not steeped in the language of Western religious Christian culture, I hope that this stop in the tourist center of Romans will awaken in you a sense of awe at God's deep love for you, even in the midst of your human frailty and failings. After next week, in the remaining weeks of our Roman holiday, we'll travel together into some of those Roman neighborhoods, seeing the grittier, more complicated, less familiar places in this text, the kind of neighborhoods where the only maps you can find are written in Italian. We might encounter ideas that expand or challenge what we've always thought this letter was about. We might find a new hope for the challenges that face the church and the world today. We will likely find a powerful and salient wisdom on how we are called to live faithfully in a diverse and complicated world. And I am sure that we will encounter the power of God that not only brings salvation to individuals, but it liberates all creation from the grip of sin and death. I've given you just a glimpse today. So I hope you will come back for the next 4 weeks. Or if you can't be here, if your own travels take you away, check it out on YouTube. But come back to discover Romans like you've never seen it before. Maybe so. Amen.